I'm John Underwood, and welcome to Backstory, a program that attempts to look behind the headlines at the issues and events that affect us here in Orange County. In 2016, amidst a very contentious and peculiar election cycle, one good and true thing did come about for us here in Orange County, and that was the Board of Supervisors finally, in a vote of 4-1, endorsing for a June ballot an initiative that would bring to the county a campaign finance and ethics commission. It was highly endorsed and has been strongly recommended by the Orange County Grand Jury since 2013. And our guest tonight, Shirley Grindle, is someone who has been advocating for an ethics commission for the last decade. Now, there are those in Orange County who would call Shirley Grindle perhaps a do-good-or-know-nothing who is sticking her nose in other people's business, and that's a quote. And then there are those who think of Shirley Grindle as the preeminent watchdog of Orange County. So if you don't happen to know who Shirley Grindle is, if you haven't been reading the popular press in Orange County, if you didn't vote in the June election, stay with us, and we'll present you now with a short introduction into the life and times of Shirley Grindle, and then we will come back to the studio for an in-depth interview with our guest tonight, Shirley Grindle.
Over the years, there have been, well, the most notable violation was an excess contribution by our former sheriff. And he was notified, and this was it was 3 times the limit. And I asked them to return the money, and they refused to do so. Since we have a district attorney who does not enforce those violations against other county elected officials, he got away with it. So that's why you need more than a staff person. You need someone who can who can hold their feet to the fire and not just thumb their nose at them, and someone who can get the violation corrected and administratively fined.
So I don't think you give yourself enough credit. We as elected are very afraid of you.
You have no reason to be afraid of me. My goal has always been to just make sure everybody plays by the same set of rules.
I agree.
Shirley Grindle, breaking it down for the current County Board of Supervisors on the clear and present need for an ethics commission in Orange County, and doing so honestly, forcefully, and directly. An approach that Shirley has taken to every challenge in her life. As an aerospace engineer involved in crucial aspects of NASA's space and defense programs, she was a key player in a demanding field. As an active sports enthusiast, always pushing herself to win, and now at 81, manager player of a 70s-plus softball team, she drives her male teammates almost as hard as herself.
You lead off, Cheryl.
How'd you get to be coach?
Well, they need a manager, and the guys recommended me. You know, I wasn't here but a year, and they knew I was an organizer.
So it was a consensus of opinion. They could obviously see your leadership qualities.
Yeah, they did. I've been that way ever since I was probably very little. We're playing the top team in the league. You can tell.
Those are odds Shirley Grindle has never been afraid of. The only female graduate in engineering at UCLA, class of 1956. Being one of only a handful of female aerospace engineers in the 50s and 60s, and as the only female in an otherwise all-male baseball team, Shirley knows that just getting out there and taking the field is half the battle. And the same holds true for Shirley Grindle in the far murkier world of local politics and county government, where she has served as a county planning commissioner, environmental advocate, and more recently, and far more notoriously, as a public watchdog and occasional whistleblower who has, over the years, managed to call to the mat a number of Orange County officials, from members of the Board of Supervisors to the county sheriff, and in the process, champion and author county campaign and finance reform laws. But today, Shirley is managing a softball team.
That's a little high.
Been doing it for years. It's her passion, she says, and she approaches it with much the same manner as her career in rocket science or politics, that is to say,
Many
directly.
of you do not want that. I have no problem with the Board of Supervisors or any other elected officials making the selection and appointment of commissioners to commissions such as this, as long as the qualifications that are spelled out in the ordinance are complied with.
After lobbying for a decade, collecting and collating thousands of campaign contributions using 3x5 cards and typewriter technology, with countless letdowns at the hands of previously obstructive boards of supervisors and numerous attacks on her motives and her character, Shirley Grindle has led another kind of team to victory by finally convincing a majority of the current board and county legal counsel to support the establishment of an ethics commission for the county of Orange.
This initiative today is making it unequivocally clear for our entire county that this Board of Supervisors is not going to tolerate people who don't play by the rules. And we're not going to use this board to slap the backs of our friends, which unfortunately has been the jaded history of this county.
And then get it placed on the June ballot, which the voters approved overwhelmingly. Before the law goes into effect, though, there are details to work out, staff to hire, procedures to put in place.
You know, as the county recovers from the 2 decades of bankruptcy, this is the last thing we need. That's the bigger government.
And there are those in government and out who would like to see the process fail even before it gets going, and have stated openly that this new watchdog agency is unnecessary and even wasteful of taxpayer dollars. Even the Orange County Register cast doubt over the ethics law we got, rather than the law Shirley and her allies lobbied for. But Shirley Grindle, as usual, is undeterred and believes this new agency will deliver as advertised.
Shirley Grindle, how do you feel about today?
This is a big day for me. It's a big day for the county. I can't thank this Board of Supervisors enough. This is the best board we've had for many, many years. They actually are acting like elected officials instead of like a bunch of... It's been 10 years getting to this point, having to deal with former boards that were very opposed to having any kind of an oversight commission overseeing their the politics of their campaigns and other ethical issues. But, you know, I told those boards they were term limited, and I'm not. And I have outweighted them. And this year's board, I am so proud of. We have 3 votes on this board that are obviously supporting a package that will include a charter amendment that allows the commission to be established. It includes amendments to the county's campaign ordinance, also known as Tin Cup, and it includes an ordinance to establish and operate an ethics commission.
Okay, but you see no particular utility, or you don't really want to own, in any sense, a seat or a voice on the Ethics Commission itself?
Absolutely not. At this point in my life, I play softball, and I will continue to monitor all the contributions going to county candidates and elected officials, and I probably will be involved in helping staff learn how to track these contributions.
These days, Shirley's the first to admit she takes to the field a little slower than she used to. But bad knees and senior moments aside, Shirley has no intention of leaving the ball field anytime soon, or the battlefield of county politics, for that matter. She claims this new Finance and Ethics Commission is a good start, and now needs her more than ever. Though the rules of the new commission preclude anyone who helped write the law from serving on its board, she intends to be there for them as a consultant in the background as long as she is able, with her 3x5 cards and her typewriter, swinging away at undue influence and campaign corruption in Orange County.
Hurry! Never know. Okay, top of the lineup. Let's do it. 2-out rally. 2-out rally. Here we come. Get yourself on, Kenny.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, well, as I've often said, life is baseball. And sometimes baseball is politics, and you seem to be able, Shirley Grindle, to manage both at the same time. Welcome to Backstory. I thank you for coming. It is an honor for us to have you in our studio here at Los Al TV. And I want to begin by stipulating at the outset something that's not obvious to everyone who lives in Orange County, but to those of us who plow the political field every day. Orange County has been a very challenged county politically in terms of low-level corruption, shall we say. Over the years, the grand jury of Orange County themselves made the following statements a few years back, that the grand jury chose to study government ethics because of the history of impropriety by local officials in Orange County, which has gained the reputation of impropriety rivaling that of Tammany Hall. Now, this statement is a few years old on the part of the grand jury, but there are those I've spoken to in the grand jury who reinforce the idea that it's only been recently that some of that has actually improved, thanks to some of those folks and certainly you, Shirley Grindle, for sticking to it and sticking it to the politicians in Orange County from time to time when you're able to nail them down. And that's harder to do than one might think. So do you believe with this Campaign Finance and Ethics Commission now approved by the people on the June ballot and endorsed by 4 of our 5 Orange County Board of Supervisors, that an ethics commission has a shot and may in fact be able to grow legs as it grows into an ordinanced commission of the county?
Well, I sure hope it does. Well, as we speak, the Board of Supervisors has come up with a job description for the executive director. They have hired a headhunting firm, and they will be seeking applications from people who are interested in serving as the executive director of this commission. The executive director is the most important person on this commission. They will take over what I have done in terms of tracking and monitoring contributions, but they will also be establishing a training program for recently elected officials. They'll be writing manuals for candidates so they know what they need to do to comply with our local campaign rules, and they will be handling 95% of the complaints. The commission, which comes along a little later, we've got to get the executive director on board, and then there will be clerical staff assigned to that person, and it probably won't be full-time. The clerical staff really is only needed when the campaign reports get filed. The commission will be there in the cases where violations cannot be corrected or the violator refuses to correct the violation. Then the commission, the executive director, will take that to the commission, and the commission has the ability to subpoena people, records, and in the end to issue cease and desist orders and to administratively fine the violator. That's similar to how the Fair Political Practices Commission handles the Political Reform Act.
Okay, so I think I've read that prior to going after violators, there's a stage in which you simply attempt to correct the violation.
Yes. In the 38 years that I have been monitoring county campaigns, I would say that 95% of the violations are cases where the candidate has accepted contributions that exceed the contribution limit. I believe that most of those have been inadvertent, and I catch those. I notify the candidate or their treasurer, and the money is returned, and that's the end of it. You don't read about it in the paper. It's not used in campaign literature. But if you don't return the funds, then war. We must enforce those violations, and I have been the only enforcer ever since our current district attorney was elected. We have no enforcement of the Tin Cup violations. And so what has happened, we've had a number of well-known elected officials in Orange County, Eric Norby, supervisor, Mike Corona, our former sheriff, who got away with serious violations, huge contributions that should have been returned and weren't. With the commission, that will not happen, because no elected official wants to have to go before a commission and air all his dirty laundry.
Right. In the case of Sheriff Corona, though,
yes.
You presented your case to him, hopefully in the hopes that he would simply correct the violation. He snubbed
refused.
his nose at you, as you said in our B-roll clip. If the Ethics Commission, the Campaign Finance and Ethics Commission, had been up and operating, you could have gone to the next level, I take it.
Yes.
Subpoena power and all.
Yes, Mr. Corona would have appeared before the commission. And I sincerely believe that had that happened, had we an ethics commission at that time, or if the DA had done his job, I don't think Mr. Corona would have landed in jail. We would have caught him early in his career, and I'd like to think that maybe that would have stopped things.
Yeah, okay. Also, I can't help but mention in the B-roll, you refer to yourself as an organizer. You've been organizing since you were a small child, you said. But previous to this, of course, your background is as an engineer.
Yes.
You worked for essentially a rocket scientist for many years. You worked for a company that that built and tested missile systems,
Reentry
reentry
materials,
systems.
nose cones,
Yeah, worked on some NASA programs, I understand.
a lot of them.
A lot of them. So essentially, you have a background as a rocket scientist. I can't help but I got to ask you: are there lessons you learned as an engineer, as a rocket science engineer, that you can apply to politics? Does it does it cross over?
No. People who, well, I came from private industry, and if you didn't perform, you got laid off. And I learned that in government, it doesn't work that way. Once you get hired into government, you're pretty much there for your life, regardless of your performance. But I want to say one thing. I learned as a very young child not to lie. I remember lying to my mother once. I was in high school, and I lied to her, a big lie, and she caught me. I was so embarrassed and ashamed.
How old were you?
I was in high school, and I decided I just didn't like that. And I want to tell you that in my profession as a aerospace engineer, you call me a rocket scientist, but that's for the Caltech graduates. I was an aerospace engineer, and people's lives depended on the test data that I provided with the reentry simulation facility that I operated. And I'm proud to say that in the long run, my honesty got me all the business in the country. I ended up getting all the test programs, and my competitors lost out because they had lied about what they could do.
You mean they fudge in rocket science too? Fudge the test numbers.
We were required to simulate certain reentry conditions, and that depended on the ability of your facility to provide the high temperature and Mach number that we needed. And a lot of the facilities could not achieve it, but they pretended they did. And when the actual data from materials that were recovered after reentry, my test data was the only one that matched actual reentry data. So from that point on, I got all the business.
Okay. So that's a field where honesty is actually prized and
Yes.
rewarded. Well, that's keep it true and keep it straight, and that seems to be how you have conducted your entire life. So, needless to say, county officials, leaving it up to county officials to investigate county officials, hasn't worked very well for us in the
Absolutely
past.
not.
You made the quote to a writer in the Orange County Register at one point, maybe at a couple of points. You said that you're tired of county employees investigating themselves.
Yes, that led to nothing but cover up, delayed action, and when it all finally came out, it made everybody look incompetent. And several high-ranking officials at the county lost their job over that very issue.
Yeah.
And I hope this Ethics Commission will provide a safe harbor for employees to come to if there are problems going on. And they will come to the executive director, and the Ethics Commission will not be investigating sexual harassment cases, but they would have the ability to bring it to the attention of the district attorney or the attorney general or the FBI, and not let it linger in-house in the hands of employees protecting their bosses, or vice versa.
Is there a working relationship? Will there be a working relationship between the Campaign Finance and Ethics Commission and the grand jury? The grand jury has been very supportive of this effort over the years, as we said, that you would, if, for example, if there was an ongoing grand jury investigation and some complaint came in.
Well, I guess, yes, it could. I also could envision You know, as time progresses, you always can improve ordinances. Tin Cup has had several amendments to improve it. The Ethics Commission ordinance, this is a start. It's not perfect, and I'm sure as time progresses, I can see this commission going to the grand jury to get their support on proposing amendments.
Now you mentioned Tin Cup, and we'll explain to folks. Tin Cup 1 and Tin Cup 2 were initiatives, efforts on your part, largely, and others were involved too, in getting some kind of campaign, get your arms around some kind of campaign finance control. And to some extent, it was effective, as I understand, in the County of Orange, Tin Cup 1 and Tin Cup 2, in controlling some of the most egregious violations by political candidates. Why was it necessary to move to this initiative with a campaign finance and ethics commission beyond Tin Cup 1 and Tin Cup 2?
Both Tin Cup 1 and Tin Cup 2 relied on the elected district attorney in Orange County to enforce violations. When Tin Cup 1 was enacted, the district attorney at that time fully complied with that responsibility. The current district attorney, I believe, was elected in 1998, his first term. I think it was about then. He campaigned on the statement that he would not be enforcing violations of campaign laws, and he's lived up to that. So the reason there are two reasons in terms of Tin Cup 1 and 2. The reason we need this Campaign Finance and Ethics Commission is we need someone to track the contributions, like I have done for 38 years. Mm-hmm. And we need an enforcement mechanism. This commission will do both. I will not be here forever, so I want the tracking to be taken over by commission, and it's not a full-time effort. It's easy to do, but it has to be done. That's the only way you will find the violations of the contribution limit.
Yeah. Now you've been doing this essentially and notoriously by hand over all these years with your 3x5 and 5x7 cards and your IBM typewriter and you know, that's real old school. Presumably, when an executive director is hired, which should be soon, right?
I hope.
And a part-time staff is brought on board, they'll do that digitally, electronically,
Yes.
and will it be just as good?
It can end up being just as good. It might take a while for clerical staff to start recognizing trends. I don't want to get into it, gets complicated, but the Tin Cup ordinance aggregates contributions made by a person and by that person's company that he owns. And you have to coordinate those two. So you have to know those aggregations. Also, by putting all this on a computer program, they'll be able to sort the data, and there will be all kinds of reports coming out. You've got to understand that when I started doing this in 1978, we didn't have home computers. And so I'd been through about 8 typewriters and probably 100 ribbons. I've got close to 150,000 cards now. About 30,000 are down at University of California at Irvine in the archives. I guess the biggest thing I worry about is a fire destroying all my cards.
Yeah. Well, see, if it's on electronic form, then we have backup.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned about getting started with your cards in 1978, 75,
Yeah.
76. But you actually got started before that. Your first entree into the world of watchdog agent of the people, was way back in the late 60s, early 70s,
Yes.
with a very, a dust up, literally, over the establishment out in the city of Orange, where you lived, sandblasting and rock
Yeah. Sand and gravel.
gravel company trying to come in and basically shoehorn itself into the backyard of a residential neighborhood where you,
Yes.
unfortunately for them, happen to live.
Yes.
Tell me about that
Oh,
that
was-
initial contact that got you involved and on a
Okay.
long road as a watchdog.
I had bought my home in 1963 out in East Orange, and just down the street from my home was a 70-acre orange grove. And beyond that, on the other side of that orange grove, was a 150-foot deep gravel pit. One day, I was working up at Space General in El Monte, doing my reentry testing, and I drove down the street, and there was a sign at the bottom of the street and announcing that there was going to be a city council meeting to change the zoning from agriculture to S&G, which happens to be my initials, but it was to change it to sand and gravel. I went to work that day, and I asked this little girl that worked for me, Virginia, what's a city council? And that's where I started. I had never voted. I didn't read a newspaper, and that was the beginning of being involved as a citizen activist. And I fought Conrock, organized all the neighborhoods out in East Orange, and we fought them for, I think it took almost 9 years. And I knew we had the votes on the Board of Supervisors to turn down their zone request. And I was never so disappointed in my life when they withdrew their application at the 19th public meeting that we had on this issue.
Yeah.
But that got me known to the Board of Supervisors. And Ralph Clark was a former mayor of Anaheim, and he ran for the Board of Supervisors. And he eventually asked me to be his planning commissioner. And that was in 1973. And I was on the commission for 4 years. I was chairman for 2 years. And what an education. I found out how decisions really get made.
And how's that?
Money, lobbyist.
I see.
I developed a sincere dislike for lobbyists to, for money, they'd sell their mother for a vote. They didn't care what the project was or who the client was, but they were greasing the skids with very large campaign funds. At that time, there was no limit. And I know one lobbyist that loaned one of the supervisors $50,000 on his campaign to get elected, and 2 or 3 weeks after that, that supervisor was voting on that guy's projects. These kind of lobbyists operate totally behind the scenes. The public never sees them. They don't know about them. And they really disrupt good government. And that actually also gets into contract awards by the county, which was another battle that maybe someday we'll talk about, how lobbyists get contracts with the county government for their clients.
So your experience on the commission as an actual county official on the planning commission for the county of Orange was sort of a mixed bag for you of pleasure and pain.
It was a 24/7 job for me. And I know when I finally quit, I left the commission after 4 years. The last few years, I had had several small engineering firms and soils firms. See, at that time, the supervisors and their aides were hitting these people up for campaign contributions almost continuously. It was not uncommon for a supervisor to hold 6 or 7 fundraiser parties throughout a year to raise money and to get reelected. You know, once you get elected, the whole goal of these guys is to get reelected. And it takes money to do that. And by the way, that's when the corruption starts, when they have to worry about getting reelected and they know they have to raise the money. That's when things get a little shady. But
You know, you mentioned about your stint as a planning commissioner. You actually walked off the job, quit
yes.
at one point. I guess got disgusted enough.
No, I quit in order to run the Tin Cup Initiative,
Oh, okay.
to write a campaign law, and I put together a group of about 15 people. It included the developer to the environmentalists and everything in between. And the only thing we ever agreed on was the county needed a contribution limit. And we got an ordinance written, that was Tin Cup 1. And the group said, let's take it to the board and let them adopt it. And I says, no, we're not going to do that. The board can unadopt it.
The Board of Supervisors.
Yes. If you let the board adopt it, then 6 months later, they'll unadopt it.
Yeah.
And I said, the only thing we can do, we have to run a county-wide initiative. We ran the first county-wide initiative ever done in Orange County. And we had 1,500 volunteers. Nobody was paid 1 nickel, not anything, to get signatures. And we got over 100,000 signatures. And because we got enough to qualify it for the ballot, I convinced the board to go ahead and put it into effect rather than put it on the ballot. Because we had qualified it, means it's the same as if the voters had passed it, which means the board cannot weaken it or throw it out without voter approval.
Yeah.
And boy, has that paid off for us.
Well, that's sort of the advantage that you're sitting on right now. You could have gone with this particular supervisor board. You had some sympathy from certainly Chairman Spitzer and some others. You could have handed this over to the Board of Supervisors, let them ordinance it. You never would have had to gone to ballot in June. Why did you decide it was necessary to go to ballot in June, despite the support you had, apparently, from some of the supervisors?
I wrote an ordinance to establish the Ethics Commission. I took that to them. I told them if they didn't adopt it, that I was going to have to run a county-wide initiative, which I will tell you is the last thing in the world that I wanted to do, particularly at this age, and that would interfere with my softball games. Surprisingly, at least 3 members on the board were very supportive. No, we'll work with you on this. In a way, I thank God that happened, because I later found out after the county council got involved in going through our ordinance, Orange County is a charter county, and the state has rules that govern charter counties. And one of the rules is that only the Board of Supervisors can make appointments to commissions like this. The ordinance I had written, the board did not make the appointments. Had we run a county initiative with that in there, it would have been found invalid, and we would have wasted that time and effort. So I am glad that this board got on board. The ordinance is not perfect. We didn't have to go out and get 150,000 signatures. And there was never an argument from the board about putting it on the ballot. I told them from the very beginning, the voters have to approve this. And they never debated that. They went along with it. And we were able to put in the ordinance that only the voters can undo this. So we got that protection, and I'm very glad that the board supported us on this.
So if it hadn't gone to a ballot initiative in June, which you're thankful it was passed by a broad majority of the voters. But if it hadn't gone to the ballot in June, would it have been just something that the board could have
Yes.
had their way with and down the
Yes.
road in the future at any
Yes.
time?
Yes.
And canceled out parts of it? Or
Yeah.
I see. So that's why it had to go to a vote of the
Yeah.
people. Okay.
And they never, they knew that. They knew what was at stake here, and they never argued about it.
Of
They
course.
supported my request.
I see. And that's the first time you've ever had that kind of cooperation from a
No,
board of
no,
supervisors
no,
before?
no. When I rewrote the first Tin Cup ordinance, I rewrote it. It's now known as Tin Cup 2. Gary Vasquez was chairman of the board. And in order for Tin Cup 2 to become law, the voters had to throw out Tin Cup 1 and approve Tin Cup 2. So I went to Gary Vasquez and I told him, I want the board to put this on the ballot because I don't want to have to go out and get signatures. But if you won't put it on the ballot and I have to run an initiative again, I'm going to drop the contribution limit down to 500. Oh no, we'll put it on the ballot. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
And that passed by 85%,
Yeah.
a very high approval.
So you can play politics too.
Oh yeah, I know the game.
Okay. But of course, there are those that bring it up to the present now. There are those, even on the Board of Supervisors, there's at least one supervisor that feels that this.
There's only one.
Okay. But there are some in the press as well
Yes.
who believe that this ordinance, as it's written and as it was passed, is really not an independent, does not provide for an independent commission to safeguard
Well,
the public.
They're partially correct. It would have been much better had we been able to keep the Board of Supervisors out of the appointment process. But as I explained, this is a charter county, and the state has rules for charter counties, and that is a rule. Now, what we've done, even in the original ordinance that I wrote, that I had another outfit making the appointments, the qualifications to be appointed on this commission are very strict. No lobbyists, no campaign consultants, no former or elected officials that have been in office within the past 10 years, no union officials, no one who has served as head of partisan political committees like the Republican Central Committee or the Democratic Central Committee. We've done everything we can to minimize political influence from the board. In addition, Chairman Spitzer added into the ordinance that has been adopted that there can be no ex parte communication. That means the supervisors cannot be talking privately to any of the commission.
And influence them by some means.
Yes. yeah.
Privately.
And of course, the public will be watching. And I've got to say, there are 8 or 9 ethics commissions up and down the state of California. All of them have been in business for years. None of them have appointments to their commissions by other than elected officials, elected and appointed officials. We are the only ethics commission that has established strict criteria as to who can be on this commission. No other commission has done that.
Well, some of the initial aspects of this ordinance, as you and your compatriots wrote, have been pared back, have been taken
yes.
out. I mean, there was a 24-hour hotline for complaints that was
Yeah.
withdrawn.
Yeah,
does that bother you?
I didn't like it, but on the big picture, that was very minor. You got to remember that we were dealing with two alternatives: work with the board and get them to put it on the ballot, or go out there and it would probably cost $300,000-$400,000 to get those signatures to get it on the ballot. The hotline is not a big issue. You know what? That can be added later. You don't need to have it in an ordinance. I'm not even worried. Our biggest concern was getting subpoena power, and we had to fight the board on that. The board was, there were various members who supported the commission. Oh, we can't give them subpoena power. Well, how can you have an investigative commission that can't subpoena records? And we finally convinced them.
But even the subpoena of records was pared back somewhat, was it not?
No, I don't think so. The executive director has to go to the board to subpoena bank accounts and campaign records. The commission can subpoena anything, including witnesses. If the issue goes to the commission, now you got to understand, 90% of the problems will all be handled by the executive director. Only issues that the violators are giving us a problem, those go to the commission, and it's a public hearing format. There's some other steps in between, but essentially that's what happens. But the commission can subpoena what they need.
Can emails be subpoenaed?
I don't know about, probably. I'm not sure. We don't spell that out. The county council ended up having to, they changed a lot of the tail end of our ordinance. They left all the front end. There was not a problem. But the appointment process, and they took some things out that I'm now finding out about. For instance, we had a section in there that required them to appoint the executive director within 90 days. Well, they haven't done that. That was dropped out.
They also added in that 4/5 of the board could fire the executive director at will.
Yes. It takes
Without
4/5.
cause.
Well, the commission, let's say the commissioners are having problems. They don't think the executive director is doing their job. The commission can vote to recommend that the board hold a hearing and fire the executive director. If the commission doesn't hold a hearing, but the board thinks an executive director, they have to have 4/5 vote.
Okay.
So.
Well, we're kind of looking down the horse's mouth here, and is the glass half full or half empty? But let's look at the glass as half full. When is that going to get filled? I mean, we don't have, strictly speaking, a commission yet.
No.
They are working at, I guess they're headhunting for an executive director.
Yes.
And it all has to work around the hub of the executive director, it sounds
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
Can you prognosticate for us when you think we're going to have a commission
Well.
that people can write their complaints to?
I am disappointed that it's taken this long to get an executive director. But I understand this is the process they go through. They can't just, I have somebody in mind that would make a perfect executive director, but they can't just appoint a person. They
Who you
have
say,
to put it
yeah.
out.
Yeah.
They have to put out the bid for
Yeah.
applications.
Yeah.
I think once the executive director gets on board, the rest is going to follow quickly.
Okay. Now, you yourself, I think, as we saw in the video, that you're taking a back seat. Well, you, according to the initiative, as it's written and voted on, you could not
That's right.
participate as a board. You could not take a seat at that board.
That's right. And I had no intentions of doing so. I will be, once that executive director gets on board, I'm going to be working with that person voluntarily on the tracking mechanism.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing to me.
You're not
So-
going to take your mitt and your cleats and go play softball. I mean, you're going to be
Oh,
still,
I'm going to be playing softball as long as I can.
but you're still going to be playing politics. So,
Yes.
You know,
I have
we're-
to tell you, I tell this to everybody. When I joined the softball league, the senior men's league, about 6 years ago, it was so nice to play softball with these guys. They're so different than the politicians, the elected officials. And I said, it's so much nicer playing softball than playing hardball with the politicians.
Nevertheless, you're not leaving the arena
No.
just yet. You're going to stay in there as a
I will,
consultant
yeah.
to
Yeah,
whoever
no,
the
I'll
executive
continue.
director ends up being of the commission, of the ethics commission.
Unpaid, voluntary.
Yeah. Okay. And you think that you can? Do you think that it could work without you, without your angelic hovering over them? Do you think they could do it on their own? I mean, do you think you need to be there in the background?
That's a hard question. I don't want to underestimate them, but I don't have the confidence that they would do the job that's needed to be done. And I could show them how to do it. It's not that complicated.
All right. And you're not going anywhere
No.
anytime soon.
I hope not.
Okay. You're not taking your softball team on the road somewhere and
No.
leaving town. Okay. How's the team doing?
Oh, my team on Thursday, best team I ever had, but we're vying for third place out of 9 teams. But this is senior softball. One day, they play beautifully. The next day, they couldn't hold a ball if their life depended on it. They drop everything. That's the way it goes.
Even with you organizing them.
Yeah, well, that has nothing to do with, these guys are all 70 years or older, and many of us are late 70s and early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be amazed at how good some of these guys can play.
Oh, yeah.
And at this age, we ain't going to change any of our habits. Don't try and tell us a different way to do things.
Yeah. Well, you have a habit over your lifetime of forcing people to change their habits, at least in politics anyway. You have a knack for doing that. And thankfully for the rest of us in the county, you've actually held up your end of the sky by yourself. There are a lot of people in this county, and even outside the county, looking at Shirley Grindle and saying to themselves, she did it, maybe we can do it too.
Yes.
I happen to know, I visited your house the other day. You took me for a wonderful little walkthrough. Found out some personal information about you. You're nuts about elephants, for one thing.
Yeah.
Having been to Africa, I guess.
Yes.
And traveled a bit there, and elephants all over Shirley's house, from on shelves and everywhere. But I noticed a plaque in her hall, and I asked about that plaque, and she looked at it, and you even got a little teary-eyed about it. And I thought maybe I'd struck a nerve there. Maybe I shouldn't ask about it. But you were forthcoming, and you said that this is my most cherished award that you have received over the years. And it turns out it was a plaque that hangs in your hallway. And I asked you to bring it today because I want to show it to you folks. This is Shirley's most prized possession as an award that she's received. And she's received many over the years from different organizations, from everyone from the state of California, the Board of Supervisors, congressmen, senators. This is the award, let me show it to you, that Shirley prizes more than anything. And you got a little misty about it when I pointed it out and brought it up. And I wonder, tell me what the backstory is on this award.
This was presented to me on the last day I served on the Orange County Planning Commission. And these are 70 homeowners associations throughout Orange County who paid to have this plaque made and signed on. And I have to, you want to read it or you want me to?
If you can, I'd prefer you do it.
What really meant a lot to me was this. It says, with affection and deepest appreciation to Shirley Grindle for unsurpassed honesty, integrity, and excellence in her service to the people as Orange County Planning Commissioner, 1973 to 1976. Nobody in this county has ever gotten an award like this.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. It describes me. You know, when the press describes me, they always have to say that I'm a little feisty. And
You mind reading it?
yeah, there is a certain blend of courage, integrity, character, and principle, which has no satisfying dictionary name, but has been called different things at different times in different countries. Our American name for it is guts. I like that. That's me.
Well, it certainly is. And, you know, your gutsy record goes on in supporting efforts for people all over, well, not just Orange County, but outside the county too. People who look at you, Shirley Grindle, as someone who was able to challenge authority, speak truth to power, and actually prevail. I'm thinking of an organization just recently out in Temecula. I have a correspondence here from an organization called Save Our Southwest Hills out in the Temecula area, who wrote to us and said the following. Shirley Grindle was a wealth of information and ideas to support our advocacy efforts when our community opposed a massive gravel quarry of our own. Shirley was willing to help people she didn't even know or hadn't even met when they were faced with the possibility of a quarry in their community. And it's one thing to protect your own community. Lots of people do that for lots of practical reasons. Family, friends, community connections. Yes. But when you reach out and affect communities all over Southern California, that's a whole other level of giving, Shirley. And I want to thank you for being there all of these years to do that. And I'm sure you're just as happy as we are to have an ethics commission coming on board that has now been sanctioned by the County Board of Supervisors, and hopefully will pick up where you left off over these many years with your careful tutelage. So please, don't go anywhere yet.
No, I've not gone anyplace.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
My honor.
We look forward to your continued efforts in the matter of nailing politicians for bad behavior. And for backstory, I hope you've enjoyed this program as much as I have. I'm John Underwood. Good night.